Hi everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of the Human Factor Security Podcast with me, your host, Jenny Radcliffe, the People Hacker. I am stoked to have a returning guest to my show back on this week. Welcome to the show, Dr Martina Dove.
Thank you.
It's so nice to have you back on. Hi.
Yeah, you too. I love talking to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I love talking to you as well, and I also love receiving books from my friends in the post. You were so awesome. So just to summarize, in case people don't know you from the last show or have not got the book and have been under a rock, let's tell everyone who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. So basically my name is Martina. I'm a researcher. I did a PhD on fraud, on sort of vulnerabilities, on how scammers persuade us, the persuasion techniques, scamming techniques, our own vulnerabilities. And I wrote a book about that. So that's me in a nutshell. I work as a researcher now. So yeah, I'm still passionate about all things fraud.
So, I mean, first of all, I really want you to come on and talk about this book. So, Dr. Dove has been on the show before. I mean, Martina's been on the show before. And obviously, we hit it off like a house on fire because persuasion and influence and scams obviously is my passion as well as yours, although we come at it from slightly different angles. But the book is, I mean, I was honoured. I'm privileged enough to get a pre-publication copy to have a look at and to chat to you about. So I'm very grateful for it. And this is so good. I mean, you must be so pleased to finally get it out there. Was it everything that you expected when you picked up the copy? And how did it feel to get it done and in that format finally?
Yeah, it felt really good, especially because like during my PhD, I'm not a typical academic. I just like going to school. Like I wasn't always supported by all of my supervisors to publish. So I knew I really wanted to get this book out. And I was super pleased that actually the publisher from the first time I approached them really liked the idea. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted to make it less of a journal article and more kind of approachable to people in terms of like how it's written and how, I explain things, but also kind of say, look, there's a science behind it too. And I'm really pleased about, really pleased about my front cover. So I have a copy here too. So this is actually my friend Lydia's design. It's one of her designs. She designs like really beautiful wallpapers and things, and she just adapted one of her wallpapers for me for my book. And kind of
made me think of William Blake. It was like, is that what it was meant to do? I was like, tiger, burning bright. I know it's probably not a tiger. Now I look at him as a civet.
Kind of leopard. Yeah,
I don't know, but that's good because fraud. It's fooling me. I don't know what I'm saying.
It just looked really sinister. It does. It's sinister, and I just thought it goes really well. And I wanted it to be like they gave me like Getty images to choose from, and I just thought, like, I was flicking through these boring images, and I was like, that can't be me. I can't have a book like this. No. So I just basically said, can I just have my own cover designed? And they said, fine.
So you said you said you wanted to write it, and get it out there and kind of, I mean, I reviewed it and gave you a quote because for me, it was like, this is an incredible achievement, Martina, because what you've got is you've got all your research, and it's so easy for me to access those things. So, things like the chapter on deception, I would have read like exhaustively for work in the past, things like to Paolo and everything, but you've really sort of put those things in, and you can see, so I could see in there all my usual references going, okay, so we've got Daniel Kahneman for cognitive bias, thinking fast and slow, but then the academic rigor that you back up these things, I was just so impressed that you could you can make something so readable, but with all that academic rigor in it. I mean, it's a real achievement. I think you should be so proud of it.
Thank you. And I mean, please, don't, I'm pretty sure academics will now go, I must read this book, and I'll get bad reviews on Amazon.
I'm sure you won't. Nobody give it a bad review, or I will hack you. People hack you. I'll be after you. So, cool. But I mean, one of the things you say, you've got a dedication in the front, and it's really touching. And you say to fraud victims everywhere, it is not your fault. It is a crime. may you find your voice to tell your stories proudly. I mean, this really was the motivation why you, in some ways, you don't really care what academics and what experts think. It's to help people, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I must say, when I started this research, I had never been defrauded, and I'm ashamed to say that I was one of those people thinking this wouldn't happen to me because I'm intelligent, because like everybody thinks this, right? And then when I started my first study, where I interviewed fraud victims, it really brought home how sophisticated some scams are. And how, the reasons why people go along with things, sometimes they know it's not quite right, but there are personal reasons, there are emotional reasons. You kind of can't help but feel empathy towards how in certain situations we are all vulnerable. We just need to be targeted at the right time with the right scam, I think, and people don't realize that, how much of a psychology makes us vulnerable from the start.
And what makes this so, for me, I mean, obviously I've been saying that for years before you and I knew each other. You know, we were saying, you're going to get someone, you'll get someone when they're tired, or you'll get someone when, by coincidence, something just resonates with someone. So maybe they've had some problems with the package, and, just logically, just factually, that sort of chance scam lands. But what makes this difference is that you academically you put a model together of things. There's a big list of things like big 5 psychological factors, and like you're saying, social sort of things that will make us more susceptible to fraud. Talk to me through a little bit about the way that you sort of, the tool and the kind of the model that you put together to sort of to really measure fraud susceptibility, because it's different for everyone. It's a very tailored thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the model that I actually based on my research. So it's not based on the big 5, but it touches on some of the big 5.
Yeah.
So what I've done, in a nutshell, in a very, very quick explanation, I went into my research knowing that I would like to design some kind of measure of fraud vulnerability. So I kind of, I pulled all the data that I had from my interviews with fraud victims. I pulled the data from literature, from people who were talking about different things. I then wrote all of the questions that would go into this measure. I then sent those questions to be assessed by the people in the industry. So I had like 3 different types of people that were actually rating these questions. And I think it was people from the industry, such as you, fraud detectives and so on. Academics who wrote about these things, and also fraud victims, because I wanted to get their input. And then the questions that made it, into the measure, I did statistical analysis on and stuff, and it came out with these 5 factors, which is impulsivity, compliance, decision time, which is like how long you take to process information. Are you quick to do things? Vigilance, are you somebody who's like more cynical and more vigilant in terms of like people's motives? And a final one, which was really surprising to me, are called belief in justice. It's actually belief that people hold about only certain people falling for scams. Yeah. And the justice is there, should they, and like that was a surprising one actually, but that came through my interviews. A lot of the fraud victims told me, I never thought this would happen to me because I'm a fairly intelligent person, and it's this kind of confidence we have in ourselves sometimes that make us make these decisions thinking I would spot the scam, right? So you're less careful, you're less but yeah, that's basically what I've done. And then based on that, through a couple of my studies that I've done, I was able to present a model that kind of gives us a view of what are the things that could sort of influence fraud.
And like, Jill, that something's just come to me. I just to say to all the listeners and viewers, like I geek out when I talk to Martina, because it's just like having a real book that I can just ask anything. It's kind of like and just on that you're talking about for that, like just world bias. Did locus of control come into it? Did you ever look at locus of control and whether that had anything to do with it? I'll put a little definition of what that is kind of thing up over us speaking. But
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it did. Like definitely, I think in one of my studies, I mean, my thesis is also available to download for free online. But in one of my studies, which is pretty complicated, so I won't go into it. But I did test the locus of control, and I think like a locus of control, basically what it is. If you have an internal locus of control, you are more likely to believe that you control your own destiny. If you have an external locus of control, you believe that others or things that happen around you control your destiny.
Yeah, like that. So the way I always say for external locus of control, that you're a leaf on the wind, and things
Yes,
happen,
yeah.
and it's a way of very easily sort of pushing responsibility for anything to one side. I mean, I was talking about the riots in Washington, and I said, sometimes giving someone to blame for like a shit life, basically, people like that, because if you've got that external locus of control, then it's like, well, of course this isn't my fault that I'm not a rock star or whatever, and then it's easy to fight against. So sorry, I had to interrupt you just because I know we have to define it, but I'm kind of obsessed.
No, that's fine. So basically, like what I did, I used a measure of locus of control by a researcher who split it into more finer things. And one of the things was belief in powerful others. And I did find that actually people who are more likely to believe in powerful others were more susceptible to fraud based on my measure.
Oh, so is that linked to, is that, oh God, that throws up so many different things, because I wonder if there's sort of cultural things to do with hierarchy and authority, and then you bring in Cialdini. I mean, wow.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, definitely. I mean, when you think about it, Jenny, you mentioned the persuasion techniques, like authority is one of those, how scammers evoke authority in terms of, I'm a bank official, I'm a police officer, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor. They're always some kind of a official or in a position of trust. Like in romance scams, and romance scammers always in the army, generals, somebody who would protect you, who wouldn't scam you, so I think it's not really surprising that kind of was connected.
So, I mean, I've got so many questions on, so you should see my notes. They're all over. It's like a spider's rush, because you keep saying things. I'm like, oh, this. I mean, the book is amazing. Just to say to people, like, it's not just for people. It's not just the academic research behind it. What you do is you detail the different types of scams and the different things that might go into them. So starting like with something like a 419 scam. So the most famous of that is the Nigerian prince scam. But you mentioned their romance fraud and everything else. It's the mechanism behind those scams that I think sometimes even the perpetrator isn't really aware that it can be broken into those psychological terms, are they? But you break them, and they are very different the way those things work, right?
Yeah, so I would say that a good scammer is aware of how this will work. I think there are a lot of opportunity scammers that are just copying scams, so maybe they're not aware, but I think they are designed in a way to actually persuade or evoke certain things at the certain points in time and for certain personalities. And so a lot of the times I think with the internet you get a whole lot of scams, right? And some are not that convincing because that's not who you are, right? But like, I think smarter scammers take a little bit of time to get to know you. And I think, this is basically what romance scammers do quite a lot of the times. They invest months before asking for money. And when they ask for money, it's a relationship, So yeah, definitely, scams are different. They all kind of fire different things in us. And it just depends what kind of person you are. If you're somebody more emotional, you're going to fall for more emotional scams, such as GoFundMe campaigns, like, stuff like that, prizes.
But it's interesting what you say about building them and the sort of longer cons, because I talk about that from a spearfishing point of view. So, and I think one of the things that you pointed out that I kind of I'd heard before, but it really came home when I read it again in the book, was people think that they can spot obvious scams. So obviously, if you get an email through that asks for a bank account details straight away, and there's lots of spell mistakes, a lot of people would say they would be the big flags for me to say this is a phishing email, for example. But there are still, unfortunately, some people who really do still fall for them. Maybe senior people, maybe people who are, have some kind of personal factors that means that their guard's really down. And the thing that you said about that was that they are, unfortunately, they're the people who will be scammed again, because sometimes that obvious scam that's sent out is really just to flag the most gullible
Mm.
people. I mean, that's incredibly cynical and cruel, isn't it? That they would keep going.
Yeah, like I would say, very obvious scams, especially like Nigerian ones. I think there's a quote to research on that. A lot of the times they still work, and why they still work, because there are people who believe them. They're incredibly versatile, so you can adapt them to different situations. I've had variants of like a Syrian girl needing a person to help them take money out of the country,
Yeah.
widowers, lotteries. It's the same scam, but dressed a little bit different. And also, I think, sometimes when they make them very obvious, they are trying to target people that unfortunately maybe have learning disabilities, are unable to spot different things. A lot of the time, elderly populations, like if the family hasn't noticed that they're being exploited by scammers. So a lot of the times they're just like a fishing expedition, like casting a net to get a catch.
Yeah.
And then these people are targeted by different scams.
And I just thought, I think that might come, even in the security community, that might come as kind of not a surprise. It's not surprising, but it's quite shocking that's a tactic, because what we would talk about more, and what I certainly would talk about more, would be that longer con, as I say. And it's just interesting what you're talking about. You talk about visual priming, but I mean just priming anyway to prepare people for that, for that longer con. And it actually made me think a little bit about big tech and about social media and about that priming effect. By which we mean is that you sort of, we call it someone's information arena. It's like if what you see is connected constantly with a certain thing, then it makes that approach all the more likely to succeed, doesn't it? So I mean, I'm sort of mixing up the way I'm saying it, but what it means is that before you make that final approach, you make sure that person is kind of subconsciously seeing lots of associated words with what you're finally going to ask them about. I think the one that you use is
sextortion, I think.
Yeah,
is the one.
You talk about if someone wanted to try and sort of sell you a holiday. I think the one I'm remembering, because I've read this lots of times. It was just a while ago, and I just kind of glanced at it again for today. But you talk about beach and relaxing, and you sort of make sure that they see, and maybe post those pictures and do all that type of thing until they're associating that account perhaps and seeing it all the time, and so that when it finally comes up and it's like it's a, I don't know, a phishing email about a discounted holiday, it's like they're primed to receive it. That's what I mean. I haven't really said that very well, but it's about preparing an information environment, right?
Yeah. So like, I think basically what's kind of interesting, how scammers do things, it's not about what they're trying to tell you. It's about how they're making you feel. And, when they're trying to prime you, it's about what they want you to do, but they also want you to be in a state where you're not thinking. And, this is what these kind of like priming things do. Like, for example, if you get a phishing email and it has HSBC logo, that logo is there to actually just reassure you this is a legitimate email, right?
Yeah.
So they kind of like
you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they basically just evoke whatever they want to evoke. They evoke excitement with certain things. With a holiday example, they put you in the mind of that you want this, right?
Yeah.
So you're more likely to just like go, oh yeah, this sounds like a good idea. With a, like the phishing examples of like mimicking real companies is to reassure you this is a real company. Look, there's a logo. So you're processing this information, not even thinking, you're just making associations without actually being conscious.
And that's the thing for me, though. It's like, I almost feel like we're in the era of scams. It because of the sort of fake news. And I mean, if you look at like now, we're recording this right now, February 2021, the second impeachment trial is underway in America. And I'm not going to be, get particularly political. It's very obvious what my politics are if you look at my Twitter account, for example. But it's the idea that there are facts, and that somebody can just ignore those facts and just, even like when it's on tape, even when, and just repeat something else often enough until people just don't rely on fact anymore. I mean, and that's, to me, that's that's the high level scam that we're kind of, it's the world, we're in a world of it now.
I think that's probably a very new phenomenon. I'm pretty sure there are researchers looking into the fake news and how this is spreading and stuff, and how it works on people. I think we are seeing something that's relatively new.
Well, there was a documentary in the UK, and they asked that very question, and they said, has this ever happened before? I mean, obviously, this, I think what is new is the scale and the depth and the reach and the speed of it, and that's what so that's new. But what they found was, they said there was instances, and of course it was just a documentary, and I won't be able to remember, but I will look it up. And he said there was a newspaper, sort of at the beginning of the 20th century, sort of mid-war, and they said, we can give you a war if you just give us something that we can build on. So they made certain incidents, they just attributed it to a foreign enemy. It wasn't that at all. They knew it wasn't that, but they knew that if they gave people a common enemy, that they'd rail against it, even though it was completely fake. Nobody asked whether there was evidence. They just wanted that common enemy, and I think you sort of see that in the way the truth is subverted or just ignored now, which of course is the whole point of fraud, isn't it? The whole point is that this is a false narrative, that we're going to do anything we can to grab someone and entangle them in it. I mean, it goes from that very granular, spearfished victim, all the way up to kind of like a shift in society. That's what I was thinking.
I think you need to kind of also look at this from the position of how people trust, right? So like in terms of fraud, right? Traditionally, you go into a shop, you purchase something, you walk out with the goods, right?
Yes.
Internet has actually changed that, because there's no real shop, so it's a virtual shop. So when you're purchasing things online, you are trusting that the person is gonna give you what the contract is about, right? Like you paid for this and you're going to get this, right? And this is where fraud came in, right?
And like, this is your early experience personally.
Yeah. So like the same, I think is happening with the news, in terms of that, we, for a long time, news was credible. So we still have this old-fashioned idea that if it's in the news, it's credible. And a lot of the times, I think even the news, outlets are not sure if things are happening for real or not, because it's so easily manufactured now. So I think this is a new phenomenon, that actually, you have these agents that are manipulating people, and nobody quite knows if it's real or it's not real. And you see these things on Facebook all the time. People are posting things like, I do not wish Facebook to take my data, I'm saying this, I'm evoking this. I'm like, you signed up for this, you literally agreed to the terms.
Literally agreed to it.
But like nobody's rechecking facts, nobody's curious, because we've just been I think for a long time we didn't have this complexity of what internet brings, and we didn't have to check facts. If it was in the news, it was real. So I think we are actually experiencing novel things that internet is bringing to us. And I think fake news, one of those.
I mean, it has massive implications for training people to see this stuff, I think. What you're saying, what we're talking about now. I mean, you quote Berlo in the book, which is about, as an academic who talks a lot about, communication has to be high fidelity. I would have just said, it has to be a certain level, and the term used was high fidelity. And that's the thing, it means certain things. It means, I mean, I've written them down again because I always like to talk to you and bring this up with you, but it means that, for a message to really land for someone, there's got to be so many things about that message that resonates, hasn't there? And when we're trying to battle the lies and the fraudsters and everything, we've got to kind of almost deploy this to battle it. We're up against the fact that they don't necessarily believe us either. It's like telling people to use a password manager and then them saying, well, what if that gets hacked? And you kind of find like, well, I kind of almost don't have so much justification, really. I mean, you're right and you're not right. Do you see what I mean? So it's about, there's the education piece. We've got to use the same tactics in some ways and rise above it again. Do you want to just talk to me a bit about that high fidelity thing? That it's good communication skills, attitude, knowledge, position within social, cultural systems. All those things matter whether people hear you, don't they?
Yeah, but I mean, definitely that goes down. Like, I mean, it's all connected if you break it down. So like similarity, right? Like we kind of like make better connections with people we perceive as similar to us, right?
Yes.
So I guess the same with the scammer. The scammer needs to resonate they need to strike a certain chord, because it's not about what they're telling us, it's about how they're making us feel.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I think a lot of the times the communicator, like if we encounter somebody who's like, we perceive as like very, annoying or very like know-it-all or something, we switch off. We don't want to hear that person, right? But if person comes from a position where like we connect with them on some level, it's easier. And I remember I had a fraud victim tell me, like in one of the interviews, he said he got scammed on the street. He got approached by somebody, and then a guy said, "Hey, can you change this £20 note?" Or can you give me a £20 note for these 2 10s or something like that? And then eventually he took his money, and he kept his money, and he kept on talking to him, and he walked off, and like it happened really elegantly. And I remember the person was telling me, like this guy looked like somebody I would be friends with. Yeah. Right. Somebody I could imagine that he's in the same position as me. I'm in a big city. I just moved to London, so like, I just think this is the thing. This is the underlying thing. It's not about if some old man has approached a younger guy, right? Like you would immediately think, what do you want? But if somebody of your own age who looks like you, who's dressed like you, approaches you, it's immediately easier to believe them, So I think this is the same with the communication. I think mimicking the way people are talking, mimicking their values, mimicking, like telling the message in a way that that person can understand, rather than, having a one blanket, like adapting to people. I think that's what good scammers do. And, being a good communicator to be able to convey the message in a way person can understand is a big one.
But this is so huge what you're saying, and the similarity thing. I mean, we would use it all the time. I remember doing an interview for TV, and they said I wasn't aspirational, I was relatable. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and take that as a compliment. So what that means, I'm not, I'm not like people can relate, but like it's that relatability that gets people talking. And if I was a malicious social engineer, that's exactly what we'd use. But I wanted to talk to you about, the current situation, the last kind of the last year, 14 months that we've had, really. The whole world in some ways turned into a big affinity group. And that was very exploitable. We were kind of in the same boat with the same concern, certainly in that first lockdown, early part of 2020, didn't we? And that was exploited just so quickly and so ruthlessly by scammers. I mean, what sort of things did you see associated with COVID over time? Because I never stopped talking about it. I mean, I was just on and on and on, show after show after show, saying, COVID, are there any scams? I mean, the adaptability and the speed of it was huge, right?
Yeah. So I think like anytime anything happens, any big event in the world, and this gives scammers an opportunity to like spin old scams into a new thing, right? All the old scams. I mean, like in a book, I even bring a case like in Pinocchio. If you read the original Pinocchio, which is very actually sinister book, it's not a Disney version, but when you read this book from the 1800s, right, like the same techniques are used on Pinocchio. So basically, these are the old scams, but it gives the scammer a novel approach, right? So first of all, nobody has reported these scams yet, so you can't easily Google them, right? And then also everybody's experiencing fear. We were like petrified, right? I remember in a first lockdown, I would get in a car, like wipe my hands, touch something, wipe my hands again. Like it was
washing the shopping. Did you wash the shopping? Yeah, we were all washing the oranges, and oh my God.
If anybody came near me in a shop, I was like, like ready to kind of like just like take them down. So like we are living in a state of fear, and then that fear is greater for other people who have underlying conditions. So I think this is where scammers were getting in, right? There were like, what I've seen a lot of is these fake cures, right?
Yeah.
Medications for fake cures, for solutions. And like even legitimate doctors, I think I quote a couple of cases in my book. There was one like legitimate doctors were selling this like useless vitamins or something, and people were buying it. But you have to understand, like when people are in a state of fear or generally in a state of despair over something, right? They'll try anything.
Yeah.
You see this, and like for example, if you have cancer and then they selling you these oils that may not work, those are all things that when you're in that desperate state, you have nothing to lose.
It exploits hope. It's the cruelest thing.
Yeah. So I've seen a lot of those. I've seen a lot of, things like that, masks not being delivered, a lot of scams in terms of like websites popping up with things that were difficult to find. So scarcity, So I've seen a lot of things like that, popping up in COVID and exploiting basically scarcity for certain things, because everybody was hogging toilet paper and sanitizers and soap and,
It just was textbook, wasn't it? I mean, but it was exhausting, that first lockdown. And I think, from the point of view, yes, there was the fear. So we have this like massive amount of emotional content all the time. And not just from the media and from social media, but from each other, like you say, just to go to the supermarket, there was this huge emotional roller coaster of, you'd see someone and you'd see someone was sad and you'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't, what's the etiquette? Do we touch elbows or no, that's not 2 meters. And then, oh, they've not got a mask on, or they've got that nose hanging out the mask, and you just go,
oh my God.
Yeah, oh my God. But also, I remember shopping in the middle of it in that first crazy, in April in the UK, and there was no pasta, there were no tin tomatoes, there was no toilet paper in this shop. And everyone's got like, they were only letting so many people in. So it was one came in, one person went out, the next person was let into the shop. And there was just this guy, he wasn't old, he was oldish, but he had the mask and, like with the nostrils out. And I started laughing because it was just it wasn't funny at all, but it just kind of was like, it was just this weird situation. But I think then there wasn't full information. And even from the government and from, we had a news report every night, a press conference every night, but they clearly were kind of playing it sort of by ear. They were sort of, it was day to day. And I think if you put it, I think what it did, I think it took the illusion of control, if it was there, was just dissolved immediately.
Yeah, no, like I think it was a time of great uncertainty, and people don't deal very well with uncertainty.
No.
And I think, and that in itself can generate fear, right? Like even if a real panic doesn't exist, just not knowing what's happening and how you can get infected. They didn't know how long the virus lasts on surfaces. They didn't know, like what it does to the body. And we're still finding stuff out, right? Because at first we were thinking it doesn't affect children, and now it does affect children, and they have long-term consequences, So I just think, like that reminded me as well, like in the 80s when HIV came out, like when that virus, and like not knowing and misinformation that came around that, that it only affects certain groups of people. So other people weren't careful. Now, actually it affects everyone, and until you actually get to the point where, about this, right? That's when you can deal with it, and that's where you feel you have a bit of control. So I just feel like this whole COVID thing was very much like this uncertainty created panic, and in this panic, people do irrational things. And when people decide to do irrational things, scammers prosper, because you only have to offer, you don't even have to be a sophisticated scammer. You could just say, I have like 100 masks for sale when there was scarce, to scam someone, so it's sad.
It's, I think it's that, you talk about this so well, but I think you talk about visceral influence, and like I remember speaking to you. Remember you ages ago, we speaking to you about Maslow and saying, we work our way as someone who simulates these cons and frauds, and for educational purposes. We work through from, are you hungry? At the absolute bottom level, are you hungry? Are you tired? All the way up to charity and things for at the top of the pyramids of Maslow's pyramid, which I'll flash up here. But like that visceral influence, I think that it was like survival mode, and and just trying to like to watch people at first be so sort of, there was real positives came, there was real unity in communities, and then to see it just disintegrate into kind of Darwinism.
It was
that's just my take. But did you see that as well?
Yeah, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but it's a good story, right? So like once a year I go to Costco. I hate going to Costco; it's massive.
It is massive.
But like once a year I go to Costco and I purchase a year's supply of kitchen towels, tissues,
wine.
Toilet paper,
wine.
Because they're like, I hate buying things like that. Well, I don't drink wine, but like I would if I, did.
Just me.
So I was sorted when the pandemic happened. I was sorted for toilet paper for at least a year, right? So I was safe. I had enough toilet paper, but I went shopping one day.
Where did you keep it? Sorry, if you got a lockup?
Oh, yeah, no, I have a lockup. No. I have like a little storage space in a building.
I'm joking.
No, yeah, I do.
I love you so much. You make me laugh because you're so clever and so amazing to talk to. But you've got these eccentricities that just was like. Go on anyway.
It's like it's different in America. Everything's so huge, So we have a lockup for the toilet paper, so it's fine. So like I was taken care of. But I was shopping in this shop one day, and I saw that they had about 3 or 4 toilet paper packages left, and that's when they were limiting the amount you can buy as well. And I bought like a 9-pack of toilet paper. I came home and my husband said to me, like, why did you buy toilet paper? We have like a year's supply. I said, you know what? I know I was driven to it because it's like scarce and people are panicking and panic buying. And I know that as a psychologist it's stupid, but I couldn't help it. I just had to buy this toilet paper because I came across it and it was so rare to come across it.
As well, I've been, like I say, I've given, I'm sure you have as well, just interview after interview after interview, both, especially at the time. And one of the things I said, and this probably isn't really right psychologically, but I was like, it's almost reactance. I said, it's almost just like, you can't have this. So I'm just going to get it. I don't need it. But don't you? Because people really hate the idea of the freezer. Just by way of an explanation, what I mean, reactance is people don't like being told you can't do something. So and I think this is so cultural and even granularly right down to regions in the UK. So when someone says you can't do this, there is a certain mentality that says, well, that's the first thing I'm going to do, isn't there, Martina? It's like the big red button that says. I said this quote I was at an interview or a podcast, but where Terry Pratchett said, if there was a cave in the middle of the forest somewhere with a big red button and written it, and someone had put on paint on the wall, if you press this button, humanity will end. He says the paint wouldn't have time to dry before someone pressed the button. That's reactance, right? And it's like, and I was saying, and kind of like the minute that you say you can only take 4 rolls of toilet paper, everyone will buy that toilet paper. It's scarcity, and it's that we don't like the idea of not having choices, and then particularly not having choices in that what Martina so eloquently talks about, visceral influence, but in that very basic survival things, the things that there are some things that you will do without, but like toilet paper and in my case wine, I'm not going to go there.
No, I think as well, like scarcity. I mean, it's a persuasion technique, right? For a reason. When something is scarce, even if you don't want it, you place greater value to it. You're prepared to pay more for it. You just kind of like go completely irrational about it. And I think like I talked about this in one of my workshops, like Birkin bag by Hermes. They completely exploited scarcity to make this bag iconic, and it's so ugly.
Women go mad for rare, like
it's ugly. It's just like so ugly, such an ugly handbag, but because they're limited who can buy it. And I remember, like, I have a like a gay friends that are very into fashion and have lots of money to buy stuff, and they're great people to go shopping to Mulberry with. So basically they were telling me how they unsophisticatedly walked into Hermes in Paris and like said, we want to buy a Birkin, right? Like, here's a 10,000 euros, we want to buy a Birkin. And they were like just snubbed. And it's like, no, you can't just walk in and buy a Birkin. There's a waiting list, and like it's only for preferred customers. So they walked out really disappointed. And there was a person who was working in a Hermes shop outside on his break. And he said to them, look, I'm going to let you in on a secret. What you need to do to get a Birkin, you have to be a regular customer. You need to go in, buy a watch, buy a scarf, buy something else. And then when you get to like, you bought like 5 things or whatever, you go on a waiting list, right? And by the time you get it, you want it so much that you like prepared to donate your kidneys for one, right? But like they like legitimate companies do this.
Did they do it? Just did they buy the bag?
They bought the bag.
You must have been going, come on. No, you just perpetuating the myth. But you've got it. But if you take it from a very kind of objective point of view, that it's smart because because that's sunk cost. Like that is like you've invested. You know, you've had a strategy, you've invested time and resources. You've really thought about it. You've had that goal, and it's a hard-won goal. £10,000.
Well, like you said, it's somebody telling you you can't have this, right? And as soon as somebody tells you you can't have this, you want it.
It's even more, but in that example that you give, it sounds a little bit like, and I've had this in posh, snooty shops as well. Prada in Milan, I'm looking at you. I did a job in Milan, and I went in one day after work looking like I'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. And it was like, not that I could have afforded anything much in Prada, but they looked at me as if I was there to rob the place, which I could have done and I didn't. But when I went back the next day, stupidly, because you just think, no, I'm not having this. I went back when I'd just kind of done all my hair. Remember at the time I was like a little sharp bob, and I sort of put my sunglasses on and I sort of swanned in. And Martin, do you know what? I bought a key ring for a stupid amount. It was like over €100. So it was a ridiculous amount for a key ring, but they put it in a beautiful bag and everything. And I remember swanning around Milan like, I've got my, how ridiculous. I don't even care about designer labels, but I know. But what you're saying there, it's not just linked to scarcity, it's linked to status and to the way people identify, I think, their status within a group and the elevation, because it's like a way of elevating yourself, and particularly with social media now, to say, look what I got one. They've almost gamified it, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a status thing. It's kind of, I don't want to say identity, but like you do identify yourself with certain things, right?
Especially online.
Yeah.
I mean, online, it's the Instagram life, isn't it? That's not you. I always use the quote Gabriel Garcia Marquez. People have a public life, a private life, and a secret life. The public life is what you put on Instagram. Who puts an ugly shot of themselves on Instagram? Mine are all, I'm like pushing my shoulders down, sticking my chin out so I don't have a double chin. Nobody does the ugly shot.
I know.
And it's like that mask. It's another version of yourself, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's definitely kind of interesting to unpack like why people go for certain things. And it's the Birkin bag is one that really just mystifies me. Like, I'm pretty sure if I like that bag, I would be the same. I'd be shopping for scarves and Hermes to get on a waiting list.
I'm going to beat this system. But
I'm a Mulberry girl, so like,
I love Mulberry.
Mulberry's an honest company. Anybody can go and spend £1,000 on a bag.
I love the kind of girly briefcases.
Yeah.
Really gorgeous. But what I was going to say about just to finish on that is that's how. But a fraudster, like as a social engineer, I would totally look at that and go, okay, so aspirationally, this is the image they're projecting,
Yeah.
and I know that it's things like that that people don't want exposed in something like ransomware. So if you've got to just to sort of take a crude example, if you've got someone who's there with a very kind of maybe sort of a womanizer, like a celebrity who's like married maybe to a woman, I mean, and has got this idea, maybe an actor who plays roles based on being a ladies' man and being very attractive to women, and then but they're secretly maybe gay and attracted to men. That's the type of thing that ransomware just absolutely goes for, and they glean that information from ordinary people because they're like, everyone's got to size themselves, they really are entitled to keep private, but when someone uncovers that and it's clues like the Birkin bag and what we post on social media that gives it away, that's one of the that's a pressure point for people, isn't it? Because we present this image, we don't want everything exposed, we want certain parts of ourselves to be out there, and it's the things that we don't put out there that I think that social engineers and scammers and con artists threaten to expose, that makes that one so potent, something like ransomware or blackmail.
Yeah, I think, one thing that I think, sometimes we do is a lot of the time people are not even aware of who they are. They project this ideal picture of themselves, right? And a lot of the times, like, I think when, and this is how romance fraud can happen as well. Like, the scammer will give you this, they'll mimic this projected ideal picture of yourself to you, right? But I think it's kind of a lot of the times people just have this outlet where they can, like in the olden days, you would go to the pub, you would project your real self, right, on someone. But here there's a platform where you can project who you want to be, right? And sometimes, like I think some people are aware of who they are and project this other image. Sometimes people are not aware of it. Yes. But I think scammers pay close attention to how you project online, and then, can actually exploit what you're telling them about yourself.
See, I think this is so key, and this is in the fraud triangle or the fraud diamond that you brought up, because one fraud triangle is, and I'll just find one of Cressy's a basic model and put it up just to show people. But what you're talking about there, I think is, it's the rationalization for people to commit fraud for a start, but it's the way that people rationalize everything that they do to themselves. And I think that's the thing that I talk about as the most devastating fraud that you can think of, is when you attack people's what they've convinced themselves they are. Like, so someone's convinced themselves they're a really good person. And and that's a survival technique, a mental survival technique. You can't go around thinking that you're terrible all the time, or that would be a disorder. It'd be depression and other things, and guilt. But when you've rationalized that to yourself and you've convinced yourself that story, if someone dismantles that then, or threatens to dismantle it, that's I don't know whether that's recoverable. That your notion of self is like a good person or an honest person, and then someone says, well, we're going to tell everyone that you're not honest or something, it's
kind of like, it's preserving your self-esteem, I think, and a lot of things that we do to preserve self-esteem, like, I mean, the belief in justice, the belief in just world. The dark side of that belief is that a lot of the times victims are blamed for what happened to them. And the reason people do that is because by blaming it on the victim, they're telling themselves, this wasn't random. This wouldn't happen to me. I would have control over this. So yeah, and that is definitely something that maintains our self-esteem, that we have control over things, right? That we don't have control over. You have no control over walking down the street and being hit on the head by some lunatic, right? There's absolutely zero control over that. But people will try and justify it and rationalize it, not to blame the victim, I don't think. I think it's more to do with them. If they say the victim provoked it in some way. Like, I hear this, like, but what did they do to provoke that, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you did to provoke. Nobody should hit you, right? Like even if you said something to them.
It's never okay to hit someone.
But I
or
think
whatever.
a lot
no
of
matter
things
what.
that people, a lot of these like erroneous beliefs that people hold come from the position of like, okay, I'm making myself okay. I need to kind of control my environment. You know, even things we can't control, like illusion of control as well, right? People have illusion of control. And a lot of that is to actually maintain the self-esteem. They have a positive view of themselves, right? Why do we have a positive view of ourselves and we don't take criticism as well as we take praise? Because that maintains our self-esteem. So, you know, and this is like, you know, one of the things that I do talk about in a book is how scammers actually manipulate those things that are like, that make us human. This isn't something that, you know, this is actually hardwired in us, you know, because it's survival. Like if we felt bad about ourselves, we would not actually be going through life happy and functioning.
Well, so that's why I say you need some of it just to be functional. If you constantly think you're a bad person all the time, I mean, it's not survivable in a healthy way. I mean, it just isn't, and it manifests. I mean, this, you know, just to sort of to come to the end of it. I think it's just, there was one last thing that you wrote in the book that I sort of wanted to ask you about, because I'm not sure whether there's an answer to it. I didn't know the answer. I don't know whether you did in the book. I think it was something that came out there. But you said that it was this point that you made. So there's different reasons why people fall victim to scams and stuff. But you said that there was research. I don't know if it was that there was research, or just that because there wasn't research, this was a conclusion. But you said there are people who, in almost every other area of their life, make really good decisions. They weigh up risk well, you know, by whatever measure you put in there. They seem to be sort of rational, logical people, but that they're sort of open to scam offers. And it was just this one line that you wrote that was like, so there's someone who makes otherwise good decisions, but they just are susceptible for no real. Am I right in saying that you said there's this group that there's no real explanation as to why that would be? I mean, there's 1,000 explanations. There's a book of explanations.
Yeah, no, there's probably an explanation for that, but you know, we would have to talk to that person a little bit deeper. But yeah, I do know the research. That was the research done by the University of Exeter called Psychology of Fraud or Psychology of Scams or something like that. They actually did quite a lot of studies, and then they produced this amazing paper, which is actually free online. But they found, you know, they were sending people like these offers, these like fake offers and stuff, and seeing who's responding and that. I remember like they had people who are fully functional. And this is what people need to understand about fraud victims. Like a lot of the times there's an erroneous belief. This only happens to greedy people, to stupid people. You know, it doesn't. It happens to everyone. You know, that person who is otherwise a manager of a shop or a manager of a company and is functioning completely well, may be a little bit more impulsive and gets a bit energized when they get a free prize. I love getting free stuff. Like you know, I buy like really expensive cosmetics, and whenever they have a deal where like if you spend $150, you'll get like this little tiny pouch. Like I never use the lipsticks, I never use the tiny pouches, but I must have it, right? Okay, and that's basically what it is. But I know this about myself. So like when it comes to bigger things, like I'm able to put a stop to it. And it's really actually people not, you know, and this is what I push for in a book, actually understanding that advice such as just don't do it, just don't answer these things. It's very simplistic. You need to explain to people how they may be vulnerable so that they know themselves better. You know, and I think, you know, there are people, it's nothing to do with the intelligence. There are people who, just the same as, you know, people who gamble, it gives them something, it gives them that excitement, it gives them that emotional something that they can't get otherwise. And they're going to keep doing it despite the rational advice.
I mean, I think the thing that I take away from the book, and I think, you know, like I say, just again, we will put up all kinds of links and everything. But the thing I take away from the book is that this is a complex area of psychology. People are complex, right? So individuals. So like I think we've said it before, because I could chat to Martina every week for hours, picking your brains. But like one of the things is like people, on the one hand, there's things that we've all got in common. So we all respond to fear in certain ways, psychophysiologically, and we all respond to reward in certain ways, although it's a scale. But then, because people are so nuanced, and because there's so much context comes into things, and and environmental factors, and there's so much to it, that you can't say that you'd never fall for a scam. And all you can do is arm yourself as well as you can to understand when it might come at you. And maybe, maybe you fall for it, recognize it in progress, slow it down, report it better, understand it better. And I mean, I think that's what the book really makes a brilliant job of doing, Martina. Congratulations, my friend, on a brilliant, I loved it.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's such an
and
achievement.
thank you. Like I was so grateful for you to like read the first draft, which I realized was full of mistakes.
Oh,
and like,
no. You said that. It was like, nobody's interested in like a bloody, a misaligned paragraph when we've got this to look at. I'm like, what are you talking about? No, I was honored to do it. So it's The Psychology of Fraud, Persuasion and Scam Techniques, Understand What Makes Us Vulnerable. It's by Dr Martina Dove, and it's published by Routledge, and we will put on the show notes everywhere we go, everything for you to grab your own copy of it, because it's really worth it, and some links to the papers and things we've spoken about on the show notes as well. So it has been brilliant to have you back on the show. Great book, great time talking to you. Thanks so much for being back on, Martina.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.